Welcome to the debate. Today, we're really diving into two quite fundamentally opposed ideas about how humans should, well, organize themselves and society. I'll be championing objectivism. That's the philosophy grounded in objective reality, using reason, and really centering on the individual as an end in themselves.
And I'm coming at this from a different angle. We'll be looking at collectivism, which, emphasizes that the self is inherently interdependent. It values social harmony, group needs, and sort of communal well-being above all.
Right. So, the central question we're tackling is this. Does prioritizing rational self-interest genuinely lead to the highest forms of human achievement?
Or is collective effort actually essential not just for society to function, but maybe even for, well, human nature itself?
Okay, so my position, it really rests on reason. Man's primary moral purpose is achieving his own happiness. And the way he does that is to rational self-interest, with reason as his only guide. This inherently means challenging, even rejecting the traditional moral code of altruism, this idea that your main duty is to live for others. Objectivism sees that kind of self-sacrifice as frankly evil. It turns man into a sacrificial animal. And politically, this translates directly into advocating for an absolute laissez-faire, totally free, unregulated economy. The state's role should be strictly limited, basically just protecting individual rights from force, theft, and fraud. Nothing more.
Well, the collectivist view sees it quite differently. We start from the premise that humans aren't blank slates, tabula rasa, where altruism is some kind of societal disease that gets imposed. Instead, we recognize that people naturally have pro-social tendencies. We're inherently interdependent. So in collectivist thinking, personal goals tend to align with communal goals. The priority is social harmony and meeting group needs, often over purely individual ones. The basic unit isn't the isolated individual, but the in-group, your family, your community, your clan, whatever it might be. And it's mutual obligations within that group, not radical self-interest, that provide the cohesion needed for, well, survival and flourishing.
Okay, this brings us straight to a core point of conflict, the nature of value in relationships, maybe even love itself. From an objectivist standpoint, love, like any value, has to be earned. It's based on recognizing virtue in another person. To demand love or help without first working to correct your own weaknesses and flaws, well, that's asking for the unearned. And crucially, placing love for another above your own rational self-regard is considered actually immoral.
But that seems, well, incredibly hyper-individualized, doesn't it? It almost ignores our evolutionary history. I mean, anthropologists consistently observed that cooperation, things like sharing knowledge, pooling resources, working together, that was absolutely critical for the survival and, frankly, the success of Homo sapiens as a species. So to just dismiss this natural inclination we seem to have for communal responsibility, calling it mere sacrifice or somehow immoral, it feels like ignoring the very foundation of human society and success. And, we actually see the potential failure of this kind of unfettered self-interest play out in the real world. Take organizational theory, for example. There's the famous case of the Sears CEO back in the day who tried to restructure the company explicitly on Randian objectivist principles. He basically turned divisions into separate competing units, each focused solely on its own bottom line.
And what happened? The result was, well, rampant infighting over resources, a lack of cooperation, and ultimately it contributed significantly to the company's decline. It kind of demonstrated how competition, when it's completely divorced from any sense of collective goal or alignment, can be actively destructive.
See, I'm just not convinced that example holds water because I think you're confusing potentially flawed management decisions or misapplications with the actual principles of true laissez-faire economics. Those historical instances you might point to, like the so-called robber barons, if you dig deeper, they often occurred precisely because of government interference, things like special subsidies, franchises, regulations that actually prevented a truly free market. True, complete free enterprise with absolutely no government meddling, that doesn't break down.
In fact, the argument is that all major depressions have actually been caused by government interference in the economy, not by freedom itself.
Well, that sounds highly idealistic, if I'm honest. Because, think about it. Without some form of collective effort, which often requires, let's face it, compulsion, like taxation, how do large-scale public infrastructure projects get built and maintained? Things like roads, sanitation systems, hospitals, they tend to languish. And you end up with situations like you see in some places, I think there was that example in Honduras, where basic infrastructure like filling potholes relies on sort of desperate individual entrepreneurs doing it for tips. That isn't a sign of high achievement. That's functional chaos. It leads to these weird, almost citadel-like societies where only the wealthy can afford basic services.
And I have to reiterate my core concern here. The steady movement toward compulsory collectivism, towards welfare state ideas, it inevitably, I believe, trends toward dictatorship and, eventually, economic disaster. The crucial point is that individuals do have free will. They can choose freedom. And choosing freedom means choosing rational self-interest as the engine of human progress and achievement.
But the weight of evidence from anthropology to sociology to even organizational studies seems to consistently suggest that for a society to function, let alone thrive, we must acknowledge the necessity of cooperation and shared goals. These things often need to supersede purely radical, individualistic desires. The self, it might be better understood as just one component within a larger, vital social unit.
Ultimately, it seems both frameworks, objectivism and collectivism, they do offer essential, though starkly contrasting, insights into human motivation and how societies can be organized. It really leaves the listener, I suppose, to weigh the evidence and the arguments for themselves and navigate that inherent tension.